All right, so we're on to our next trade network to talk about in Unit 2. This is topic 2.4, Trans-Saharan trade routes. So the essential questions for this is, again, the identify and explain both the causes and the effects of the expansion of the Trans-Saharan trade network. So some basic context of this, we've probably talked about a little bit of the Trans-Saharan trade network when we talked about Africa. The trade networks themselves have a humongous role of influence. And I'm going to try to avoid talking too much about some of the things I talked in my previous lecture about Africa and in relation to this, but I will bring up some things to kind of remind you a little bit about what was said, okay? So the Saharan desert is roughly the size of China. It's very big. It's very populated. The environment's extraordinarily harsh, dry. You have shifting sand dunes that make up for great deals of travel. And so it's very hard to navigate through this, okay? The people who occupied it only hovered around areas in which there were oases. And the oases, they are where you can find water. You either dig into the ground or it bubbles up to the surface within the desert. And so nomadic peoples have been living in this area for some time, and living kind of a pastoral lifestyle for the most part. But they would end up becoming very good at using camels to navigate through the desert. We'll talk about why that is, why the camels are such an important animal and a result of the trade networks and stuff and such. The volume of trade continues to increase, especially after the arrival of Islam in West Africa. And the Berbers, who were become converted to Islam, were a pastoralist people that became very good at navigating and setting up trade routes within the Saharan trade network itself, right? As technology does improve, though, we also see the expansion of more trade along these trade networks, these trade routes themselves. Okay, so human adaptation and innovation have resulted in increased efficiency, comfort, and security, and technological advancements have shaped human development and interactions in both intended and unintended consequences. So we're talking about specifically this. The growth of interregional trade was encouraged by innovations in existing transportation technologies, and the improved technologies and commercial practices led to an increased volume of trade and expanded the geographical range existing trade routes, including the Trans-Saharan trade network. So let's talk about this one specifically, right? So the Camel Saddle. This is a good example of a new and improved technology that helps facilitate and expand trade even more so. So the camels are native to Arabia, but they were brought into North Africa roughly around the 3rd century BCE. And camels are extraordinarily adaptive creatures to begin with, but they adapt well to the desert environment that is presented in the Saharan trade or Saharan desert itself. And some of the things, the reasons why, they can consume roughly 50 gallons of water in about 3 minutes. And then in retention of that water, they are able to retain that water fairly well. So despite the heat and the conditions with the dryness of the desert, they're still able to kind of retain that moisture and retain that water. So the burden of walking across the desert isn't as great on camels as it would be, say, a horse. Horses would be in danger of losing their lives because of the lack of water and because of how much they sweat as a result of the heat, right? So they can retain water up to 10 days. That's an enormous amount of time. And then also on top of that, they have this clear lens that kind of covers their eyes, in which if there's sandstorms where the sand is kicked up, they can still see where they're going, but their eyes are generally protected from the sand and the dust. So these are animals that are really built for what they are going to be expected to do in this trade network itself. There's lots of different saddles. About 15 different varieties of camel saddles, and ones which people would ride on and other things. The Somalis, though, they developed one saddle that could help the camels carry up to 600 pounds of goods, where they just lay it on top of the camel, and they can just tie baskets and other things, panels of salt that would be tied to the side of them that they will carry across long distances. So the increased amount of materials that you can strap to these animals ends up increasing the volume of trade along the Trans-Saharan network. And so for the camel saddle as a technological improvement, this is a very important technology that they need to use, okay? And with these camels, they crossed in caravans where you have you have these large groups of camels with very few people able to guide these animals because they're very, very domesticated. They're very easy to guide. You can simply tie a rope to the mouths of the camels and then have that tied to the one behind them, and you can guide them into a direction, and they're not going to fight you. I mean, horses are a little panicky and more burdensome in trying to control sometimes. Camels, other than they spit it at you, and sometimes they just don't want to get up. They're generally pretty well behaved and easy to manage animals. They would travel at night because of the heat and because it was easier to navigate using the stars. Landmarks sometimes are, how do I put this? They're not as prevalent in an environment in which the sands are constantly shifting and the dunes are constantly changing. So stars were something they used, and the astrolabe was another kind of tool that allowed them to kind of guide themselves across these deserts. So there's a lot of reasons why they traveled at night, and it took roughly a 70-day journey to go the entire length of it. And yes, merchants, unlike the Silk Roads, where you had merchants who just kind of went between one powerful city-state or trading city and another, the people who traded along this trade network would travel the entirety of, from sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean coast. And so they would travel from oasis to oasis onward to their final destination. Gold, ivory, salt, and slaves, similar to what was being exchanged out of Africa and the Indian Ocean network, is something that is going to be traded in bulk. It's not the only things, but these are the large items that would make up the Trans-Saharan trade. Oops, where am I? There you go. Okay. So the expansion of empires included Mali and West Africa, facilitated Afro-Eurasian trade and communication as new peoples were drawn into economies and trade networks. So just like we've talked about in the previous trade networks, and this is a bit of a theme, you expand trade, you're going to expand, the variety or more powerful city-states, right? And powerful trading cities, and then empires as well. So that is where we kind of lead to Mali, and we've talked about Mali before. Is a West African West African empire, and a lot of their power derives from the control of the trade on the Trans-Saharan trade network, right? They profited much from the gold trade. They would tax the goods that came into these powerful trading cities that like Timbuktu and Janneh and Gao, and so these this empire really becomes powerful as a result of that. And they were also, the leaders converted to Islam, which then opens up the door for more trade because, of course, Islam is very vast at this time and era, and there's a lot of places that Islam reaches and is connected to, and of course they promote trade because of Muhammad being a merchant and other factors. The cultural and exchange of goods as well are a big part of the culture that makes up Dar al-Islam. They would use different varieties of exchange, whereas in the Silk Roads, they had like paper money and such, but in the Trans-Saharan trade network, they didn't have one like medium of currency. So they used things like cowrie shells, cotton, gold, glass, beads, and salt as currency. So there's more of a barter system than it was a money economy, but still, very effective in still promoting trade. They had a variety of things that they could use to get what they wanted as far as goods themselves. Okay, Mali Empire regulated trade, and that was the big thing. And so that's something that's important to know as well. I mentioned Mansa Musa. If you all remember Mansa Musa, he was the the Mali emperor who he converted to Islam, and then he went on his Hajj, and that's the one who brought all of this wealth and prestige with him. It kind of put Mali on the map as like being a very powerful empire connected to this trade, and so powerful that he could give out so much money in Cairo that it ended up leading to an economic had economic inflation as a result of how much money he was giving away, right? So the Songhai Kingdom was kind of founded in late 1400s. This replaced the Mali Empire, and so I'm mentioning them because they are also a powerful West African kingdom that comes about as a result of kind of by design picking up where the Mali Empire left off, connections to Islam, and of course the Trans-Saharan trade. And they taxed this, they encouraged the trade, and so that led to the expansion of their empire because of the amount of wealth and prestige that they get. They saw the greatest expansion under a guy named Sunni Ali, and I'm not expecting you to see Sunni Ali on a test. I do like mentioning him because, like, when we talk about examples in world history of governments, how they managed to like unite peoples and legitimize their rule, something he encouraged was interracial marriage between people who are the Mali descendants, and then also people who are Songhai, which were people that lived under the Mali Empire for some time until they rebelled and took it over. They also, encouraged the spread of Islam, and so Islam was continued to use as a means to legitimize the rulers themselves, and of course it ties into the trade network similar to the way Mali does as well. Okay. Eventually, the Songhai, and I mentioned this now because I don't know if it ever comes up again in world history, but the Songhai Empire and the Moroccan Empire do conflict with each other since they're very close to each other, and then also control over trade and things like that do come up, and that eventually led to the collapse of that empire, and about the time where we started to see the arrival of Europeans, and the Europeans using their influence and trade to kind of alter and change Africa over time. But that doesn't happen for some time in history, right? But that's the Trans-Saharan trade network in a nutshell. And so just kind of remember how trade is connected to the rise of powerful city-states and so forth. So answer your questions, get them in, and that is it for today. Next time when we come back to class, we'll start talking about some of the environmental and cultural consequences of expanding of trade.